Having shown you in an earlier video how to solve this net present value problem 1 by hand, I'm now going to show you how you can solve it in Excel. Just to recap, you can read the problem on the screen, but we've got investments of 100,000 at time 0 and another 100,000 at time 1, and then we've got profit of 0 at time 0, 100,000 at time 1, another 100,000 at time 2, another 100,000 at time 3. And we have a discount rate of 10%. We want to know the net present value and the ROI. So let's set this up in Excel. So we're going to do something like what we did by hand, but it's a little bit easier in Excel. So let's plug in some things we know. I'm going to put the discount rate in this cell. Now notice I've got the value in this cell. I didn't write it all out because I want to be able to access this as a value later in my equations. The time periods, we're going to go 0, 1, 2, 3 time periods. The discount factors, we'll use the equation we used before. I'll do a plus sign to start my equation. 1 over quantity 1 plus the discount rate. Now I'm going to do something tricky with the discount rate here. I'm going to use absolute references rather than relative references. So I don't want B1, I want $B, $1 in this case. And in a Windows-based machine, I just pressed F4 to get those dollars to pop up. And if you keep pressing F4, you can select from a number of different variations on absolute references. But I'm going to just use that one. I could use a different one, but I'm going to use that one here. And then we're going to raise that to the power of the time period, which in this case was 0. So I'm going to click, I just use a mouse to click on 0 on that cell that I want, and I see the equation I like, so I'm going to hit return, and that looks like a familiar number. And then I can do Control C and Control V, and I copy those numbers all across, and I'm going to adjust the decimals to make it look a little bit more like the problem we solved before. Okay, makes sense. Now, in these, so you can see over here in this cell, it's still looking at B1, even though I copied it across, but each time I copied it, it looked at the cell right above it. That's because I referred to this cell, you might recall initially, as B2 with no dollar signs, so now it's going to call it C2, D2, and so on. This one had dollar signs, so it always looks back at that one cell. So that's really handy when copying things in spreadsheets using complicated equations. Okay, so that's kind of our basic setup. Now let's move along and start plugging in some dollar numbers. So the investment numbers, remember we had 100,000 at time 0 and 100,000 at time 1. If we want the present value of investment, we're just going to enter an equation. We're going to multiply that 100 times, click on the cell, that discount factor, and get that number. Control C, Control V to copy that over, and there is 9091 times 100 gives me this number. I'm going to adjust the decimal places so it looks a little more familiar. Now I take the sum down here, we can use the sum function if you like. Sometimes that makes things easier if you have a lot of things. I'll just do it like that, and there's our sum. Okay, now let's look at the profit we're making. And remember, we didn't make anything initially, but then we make 100, and we're going to make another 100 time 2, another 100 at time 3. So the present value of those profit numbers, same equation as before, plus this number times this number. That better be 0. Good. I entered the equation right. And now I can just copy that across. And I'm going to trim my decimals a little bit here to look a little more familiar. Okay. Now I'm going to find the sum of the present value of the profit. I'll use that sum function again because that's kind of handy. And kind of drag through those. Boom, there's a nice sum. And I'll scrunch down some zeros so that looks a little more familiar. Okay, so present value investment, present value profit, and so the NPV is the difference between the profit and the investment. So see how I'm setting that equation up? Boom, 57.58, that looks good. The ROI is going to be the profit minus the investment divided by the investment. This is already the profit minus the investment, so I can just do profit minus investment. Oops, not minus, but divide by the investment, and I get that number. We saw that one number before, and you can leave that as a decimal, or if you like, you could call it a percentage. You can see it goes either way.